I'm swapping a 5.6 liter Nissan V8 into my first car, and that would be a previously abandoned G35 Coupe. Last time we said goodbye to the 200,000 mile V6.
That worked pretty slick.
But not before giving it a proper goodbye. But today, we're stepping into uncharted territory. The VK56, a big block Nissan V8, was never offered with a manual transmission. Until now. In this episode, we're ditching the slushbox that came with the VK and bolting up the original G35's 6-speed manual, a pairing Nissan never gave us, but should have. A VK56 with 3 pedals. Let's make it happen. Original engine out of the G35 and the front subframe reinstalled, I was dying to get this 2004 grease and grime power washed. I figured I might as well get the car all cleaned up now while it's outside. We're definitely going to be doing some cutting and welding in this engine bay, and with all that caked up oil, we don't want to start a fire. Before I go ahead and try to test fit this motor in here, I want to get it slightly cleaned up. There's a ton of extra brackets and extra coolant lines. I think I want to delete the oil cooler, which goes to the bottom. I think that might kind of interfere with our frame. There's extra PCV hoses and things that we don't need. As you can see, this wiring is an absolute mess here. I've already kind of started labeling a few things just as I unplugged it. Besides the secondary O2 sensors, all of this stuff is transmission and torque converter stuff. And we're running the manual transmission. It only has 2 connectors, which looks like both of these two. They're both 2-pin connectors. I believe one is for the reverse light and the other one is for neutral safety switch. So the rest of this, including the secondary O2 sensors, we're going to delete that wiring. So as mentioned, there's a ton of extra stuff on this motor that we're not going to need. It's unnecessary, it adds size, it adds weight, and most importantly, it adds confusion, which we don't need any more of on this build. First thing we're going to delete is the power steering pump. Now, of course, we're going to be running power steering, but as you can see, this pump sits way too far out. So I'm going to remove it for now and hope that I can reinstall it later once the engine is in the car. Otherwise, I'm going to have to figure out something different for power steering. After that, I deleted the throttle body coolant lines and then moved on to deleting the oil cooler / heater. I believe Nissan calls this a cooler, but since coolant will reach its operating temperature faster than oil, it's more of an oil heater than anything. So that, along with the coolant lines, are coming off, and we'll figure out how to plumb everything back up later on. Remove some random brackets and the entire evap assembly because we don't need that. Emission stuff is not a priority on this build.
How dare you!
Out comes the heater hose lines because they're just going to be in the way. I'm also going to remove the random brackets that holds this wiring harness to the valve covers. Last night I pretty much got all the junk taken off this motor that I want to take off. I got a ton of miscellaneous brackets, power steering brackets, wiring brackets, engine beauty cover brackets. And for now I also took off the power steering pump. It stuck out so far that we're going to have to remove it, at least for now. I'm gonna have to think of something later for that. I got the evap hose off. We're gonna delete that wiring. The extra PCV hoses, I'm probably gonna run a breather or a catch can instead of these. Just some heater core lines and extra coolant hoses that I thought would be in the way. The oil cooler lines I also deleted. These are coolant lines. This one runs along here through the belts and wraps around to this, and then the other end right here goes and plumbs in to this side of the block. And based on my research, that coolant loop right there is actually a coolant bypass. It bypasses the thermostat when it's closed and allows coolant to recirculate through the block and properly heat the block. Without that connection, we could get some hot spots in the engine, which would not be good. I'll have to do some more research on this, but if you loop these two together, I believe that would act as a bypass as well. And then with that, we can permanently delete this oil cooler. Right now, I have it still connected. I'm going to pull this all off and then just keep the oil filter right there, or I might even run an oil filter relocation. But this oil cooler is gonna go. Another thing that I deleted was the coolant lines that go to the throttle body. Basically what that is for is to heat the throttle body. Let's say if you're in a very cold climate. I probably won't be starting this thing when it's really cold, so I deleted that, and I also don't really think it's necessary. Deleted a ton of extra brackets that holds this wiring. I'm gonna try to get all this wiring tucked underneath the intake manifold just to make this whole engine look as clean as possible. Right now it's kind of a rat's nest. next. As you see, we got our PCVs on both sides plumbed into the intake manifold post throttle body. These ones go pre-throttle body. These would go into the intake manifold. I just have a little cap on here, and I didn't have another one the other side, so for now I just capped that off with some duct tape. Eventually I'll probably run all of those PCV lines to a catch can on either side. I'm leaving this vacuum line on for now. This is for the brake booster. We're definitely going to need that. These two coolant hard lines are for the heater core. We'll leave those connected for now. Ton of extra wiring that's not going to be plugged in. I would love to delete that stuff right now and clean up this engine harness, but I kind of think that would be a bad move to go ahead and delete those wires before we get the motor started. So the wiring is going to be a mess for now. We're going to need an engine stand. This VK56 VD out of an Infiniti M56. This was the motor that I was originally going to use for this swap, but after finding that this engine was blown, I decided against it. We're getting it off the stand so we can put the new motor on it. The trickiest part is figuring out where to lift this engine from. Once I figured that out, the next trickiest part was getting this engine on the stand. This Harbor Freight stand and hoist are not compatible with each other. They're pretty much impossible to get close enough together to where these dollies aren't touching. I tried to go the other way around, but I already have this hooked up this way and I'll have to undo it, and it's an absolute mess. And so right now I have the jack holding it. The hoist is actually completely disconnected, which kind of freaks me out because right now it's only balancing on 2 casters. See if I can get this off without making it fall. If these legs were a little bit wider, it would be fine, but just need to lower it slightly. One wrong move and this engine falls. It could crack the cylinder head. Perfect. Holy shit. I don't know why that was such a pain in the ass. With the engine finally on the stand, it's time to give her a bath. The best part is this engine has no current oil leaks, but all those little white spots on the engine is corroded aluminum. But with a special homemade chemical and some power washing, we should be able to get it all cleaned up. And here's the last look at the vehicle that used to house this beast. And the only oil leak on the entire engine is the oil cooler O-ring. It's a good thing we're deleting that. And you can see right here, it sticks the oil filter out another 1.5 inches. And that takes up space that we're not gonna have. The more unnecessary things I can delete from this motor, the easier it will be to fit in the car. This is the bolt that goes through it. As you can see, it's threaded on the very end and it goes through just like that. So basically what we need is we need to shorten this and we need this part to have the threads. So I know there's an OEM part from Nissan that's exactly what I need, so I'll go ahead and pick that up. So this oil filter is gonna sit just like that now, and this is the O-ring from the oil cooler, and it's actually the same exact size. 20 ounces of water, 4 ounces of white vinegar, and 1 ounce of dish soap. Good engine cleaner, it won't corrode aluminum. So we'll spray this stuff on liberally, agitate it just a bit, give it one last power wash, and make sure to dry it off really, really well. And not only that, but I also clean the transmission. And when it comes to grime, it was the worst. This motor is now looking a million times better. I got most of the aluminum corrosion off. All the plastics and everything are grease free. They are now super, super clean. Got the valley cleaned up the best that I can, and it's almost clean enough to eat off of. While I had this motor in this state, I might as well take off the intake manifold and check out the valves. Should be free. We can lift up. Beautiful. You can see how clean the V is down here. Also, if you look inside, the actual cylinder head is pretty grimy, but the valves actually seem pretty good. So we'll just start vacuuming up all the crud around the cylinder head, and then we'll do a final wipe down with a little bit of brake clean and a rag. Now I'm just gonna go through, make sure all the valves are closed, and I'll try to clean them out the best that I can. And shout out to this company right here. They sent me this tiny little clip-on flashlight. It's actually super bright, and it's actually aluminum as well. And it's perfect for looking inside these valves, giving you plenty of light. I can see a lot of sand and stuff that kind of came off the top here. I want to make sure I get that cleaned out. You can clip it onto your shirt, clip it onto your hat. It's got a floodlight and it's got a spotlight as well. A couple different color temperatures. I'll leave a link to this in the description if you guys are interested. Now we'll get these valves cleaned up. We'll spray some brake clean in all the cylinders that are closed. Use a paper towel and wipe up all the grime. And then we'll just repeat that until everything's as clean as I like it. Use a shop vac to soak up all the excess brake clean. Just make sure it's a shop vac that's compatible with liquid, otherwise those brake clean fumes are going to turn your vacuum into a bomb. Here's what the valves are looking like now. They're looking a million times better. Just use some brake parts cleaner and a rag. Once I got the other bank cleaned up, it was time to address the thermostat housing. I'm gonna plug 3 of the 4 coolant ports on it. I'm going for a clean engine build, so any extra hoses and lines that aren't necessary, I'm gonna delete them. And instead of using your typical coolant rated cap, I'm gonna be using NPT plugs, which requires quite a bit of drilling. So I'm gonna take this entire thermostat housing off just to make sure I don't get any metal shavings in the engine. Here's our coolant thermostat housing assembly thing. Not really sure what you call it. So my initial plan to block off these ports right there and this one is probably a bad idea. If we come look at the VD, its oil cooler routes the same way. Comes down here from the pre-thermostat, comes along here, goes to the oil cooler, and instead of this part going into the block over here, which it looks like it has a plug right there, but it goes all the way back up and goes to the other water neck. But that's what I wanted to do on this. I wanted to just loop one of these to this one over here. I was thinking about possibly doing this one because all 3 of these are connected. They're all pre-thermostat. This uses an external bypass. If I delete that, it could allow coolant to flow weirdly in the system. We get hot spots throughout the engine, especially in the back 2 cylinders. I want this engine to be reliable, so I'm not gonna run the oil heater / cooler thing, but I am gonna loop back the lines that plumb into it. But before we continue with that, something just came in the mail that's a key part to getting this entire project to come together. So I needed to get this engine off for the next thing that we're gonna need to do to it. And the way that I was lifting this was through the engine mounts down here. I would just run a strap up here, around, and then back to the other side. And when I was doing that, it was bending all of these little plastic things, putting a lot of stress on the coil pack connectors. And my original idea was to use that leveler connected to this brace that would hold the power steering, but unfortunately there's just no really good mounting bolts. I could put a bolt right here and lift it, but that's gonna be in the way of the transmission. So I was looking around the block to find some threads that weren't gonna be utilized, and I found these 2 on the driver's side. So that would give me a strong enough point to mount a bracket right there. And then when I come along on the driver's side, I have these 2. There was a ground, which was right here, just held in with electrical tape right here, and it was connected right there. So I pulled that bolt out. I found some bolts that were gonna thread all the way through it without leaving too much slack. Then I whipped up myself some custom brackets using some scrap metal that actually was used to package the 2-post lift. So they're absolutely free. And I also had to weld these little spacers in right here as well because the bolts were gonna bottom out. And it gives us 2 M10 bolts to hold each bracket. I'm gonna bolt these up and show you guys what they look like. And these are just gonna be temporary. I'm not gonna leave these on here, obviously. That's why I didn't try to make them look pretty. So my plan was to use these things. I kind of forget what these are called, but they're gonna go in, hold just like this. We're gonna clamp them down. Now I just need to find another one of those little rings, put on this side, and I think we should be good. With my custom mounts all bolted up, I can finally lift this motor without worrying about breaking anything. Figured that I was going to be pulling this motor in and out quite a bit, so might as well just spend the time, make some mounts that are going to make this safe to lift in and out, especially when I have the transmission bolted up to it. And that's precisely what we're going to address next. Now this one's bending quite a bit, but I think it's fine. You can always beef it up a little bit. Now we need to get the engine stand off the motor, which we had such a fun time with last time putting it on. There we go. And she's off. Well, that worked out pretty damn good. Now it's time to do one of the biggest key things of this entire project. And that is mounting the 6-speed manual transmission that was out of the G35 originally to the new VK56. Luckily, Nissan liked to keep things the same throughout their engines. The crankshaft bolt pattern and thread size is exactly the same between the VQ and the VK. Here's the old flywheel off my VQ. And now you'll see that it will bolt up perfectly to the crankshaft. So I'm not gonna fully seat that on there, but you can also see our starter is in the perfect location as well. That is because the starter ring is almost exactly the same. Now, based on that, why isn't this gonna be just a straight bolt-on process? Now, the biggest issue that we're gonna have bolting up this transmission to that engine is the bolt pattern on the actual bell housing. These holes are different, they're in different locations, and they're not gonna bolt up to the original block. There's a bunch of other minor things that are different as well. So that's why I reached out to one of the only companies that makes the entire bolt-on kit for this swap. And that company is C3 Performance. They give me a pretty good discount on this kit. Now I have already opened this box, but I thought the unboxing was pretty cool, so we'll go ahead and go through it. First thing you're gonna see is a folder with your name printed at the top. You're gonna open it up and you're gonna get your shipping information in this side right here. And on the other side, you're gonna get all the instructions and a whole parts list. Instructions are pretty thorough, they're in color. It's nice to have printed instructions. As you can see, it comes with all the bolts and all the hardware. I believe there is one other company that sells this adapter bracket, but I don't believe they come with all of this hardware. I think most of that you're gonna have to source yourself. Here's the adapter bracket itself. Billet aluminum, it's super light. I believe this bracket will bolt up any CD transmission. I actually have the CD009, so it's the weaker transmission. Eventually, I'm gonna get the CD009. It's got stronger internals, got stronger synchros, and I think it's gonna be necessary for this swap. But just for the hell of it, I'm gonna throw my 01 on there. And it's got a little engraving down here as well, VK56 to VQ35/37. Anyways, it's a super nice machine part. Let's get on to installing this stuff. First thing we're gonna need to do is install the dowel pins. For the JKs, you're gonna need to put them at the top, and for the CDs, you need to put them at the bottom. These are press fit, so they're gonna need a little persuasion. And it turns out a block of wood is the right tool for the job. I don't know why that block of wood works so much better than a hammer. It says to leave a 1/16 inch gap. I'm gonna go ahead and just get this other side in too. All right, so here's the back side of it. Slightest bit of gap. That's probably less than a 1/16. But honestly, these are just dowel pins as long as they're not protruding out the back side, which can't really see in that being an issue as long as it's not pushing past this. Should be fine. Gonna line up with the dowels. Just like that. Snaps into place beautifully. And as you see right up here, this is where we're actually gonna have the clearance for the starter. The starter on the VQ would actually sit right here in this area. On the VK, it's up here. For our crankshaft sensor mount, that is this thing right here. I believe it's some kind of 3D printed plastic. Pretty nice parts, C3, pretty nice parts. Pretty solid bolts, anodized blue. It's gonna mount right in here, so we're gonna do a little bit of trimming on this as well. As you can see, I've already taken off the clutch fork that would go right here. This is the pivot ball, and then it has the throw out bearing right here as well. That's this entire assembly. This is pretty much what presses in the pressure plate and releases the clutch, allowing the camshaft holder where it goes. So it doesn't go right here because you can see the dowel for it is right there. This actually has to go through that. So we're gonna take out this Allen here. And then it's a matter of just tracing out where we need to cut. I'll just get a rough outline of it. This freaking marker sucks. Well, this one's not much better, but it's the only thing I got. Well, I'm gonna make sure I cut well inside of that because this marker can't really get in that angle very well, but better to start off cutting short and then cut a little bit more as you go. Next, we're gonna have to cut this. I don't think we have to cut quite out as much as that, but the main thing we're gonna need to cut here for the top is actually just this little rib. I don't think we need to go too much into that.
And just begin working in little circular patterns. And when you first touch a canvas, if it's not the color you want, stop and change the color. Don't keep painting.
And now it's time to get to cutting. I use a grinder to make the vertical cuts, and to make the horizontal ones, I use a small Dremel. And with about 10 minutes of cutting, oh yeah. And then I spend just a little extra time getting the edges cleaned up so the crankshaft sensor mount fits like a glove. And what do you know? It's definitely not perfect, but it will 100% do the job. Then I do the same exact process for the top so we can clearance for the starter. And once that's all finished, we can move on to the next thing. We're going to have to replace the factory starter bolts because they protrude out farther. They actually go in this way towards the back of the engine. So once we put our adapter plate on there, it's actually going to cover part of those bolts. So they give you these little hex bolts here, which have a smaller head. Let's get these bad boys off of here. Ooh. Here's the difference between them. The head is slightly smaller. It's not going to protrude as far. The main purpose of this is so that you can replace your starter if it ever goes bad without having to remove the whole transmission and adapter bracket. It's going into aluminum, so you don't got to crank it down. Love these blue bolts. And we're going to throw these old things away. Now we need to remove this little pilot bearing right here. This is for the automatic transmission. Flat piece right here that's pressed into the crank hub. We're gonna have to remove it. I got this little cheap slide hammer thing from Harbor Freight. I think I got this a long time ago, and I got this end here that can pull it out. We're gonna give this a go. Damn it. I just cannot keep it on.
2 hours later.
After spending tons of time trying to get this pilot bushing out, I think I finally found something that's gonna work. I went to Harbor Freight and got this pilot bushing removal tool. It's the actual tool that's used to do this job, so I'm gonna give it a try and see if it works. So basically how this is gonna work is we're going to slide this in where the pilot bearing is, and then once we turn this screw here, it's gonna slightly open them, and that will grip onto it. And then this is gonna actually rest on the crankshaft, and then we'll start cranking down this nut with a box end wrench, and it will start pulling the bearing out. And little did I know, this was another giant waste of time. The claws on the teeth were too wide and they couldn't get in between the space between the pilot bushing and the crankshaft. Another 2 hours and $25 down the drain. Without even thinking twice, I'm going to plan B and breaking out the flux core welder. Now you might be wondering, what in the hell am I doing? Why is this guy welding a big ass bolt to his crankshaft? Well, I'll let the results speak for themselves. Holy shit. The pilot bearing was finally coming out. Now that was an absolute pain in the ass. Found this big ass bolt that was actually off a F-150 steering rack. Big grade 10.9 bolt, just slid perfectly in the center of that bearing without much wiggle room. So I was able to get really close to this bearing on the center so I could stay away from the actual crankshaft. And I used this aluminum here, drilled a hole with a step bit. That was the perfect size, just to kind of protect everything. Worked out perfectly. I don't think I got any kind of spatter or anything on the crankshaft itself. The only bad thing is I had to sacrifice this good bolt, but I'll get some more of them. It's time to finally get this adapter bracket on the engine. All right, so when you get this thing on, I left the original dowels in here. There's one up here and one down here. And just for the hell of it, I put this tiniest bit of anti-seize on each of them, just because, let's just say, I've had bad experiences with dowel pins being stuck in transmissions. I figured if I ever need to take this off, say I blow this engine up and I need to reuse this adapter bracket, now I can pull it off easily because there's anti-seize on the dowels. I'm gonna go just like this. And by the way, I already used a Scotch-Brite and cleaned out the mating surface on the engine. Fits like a glove. So here's the bag of bolts that bolt up the adapter bracket to the engine. The recess pockets are the ones where they're like this and not like that. So all the shorter bolts will go through the recess pockets and the longer bolts will go through the regular holes. And all the threads will need some red Loctite. Now we gotta torque these bad boys down to 83 foot-pounds. And would you look at that? This thing is really starting to come together. There's nothing better than an aftermarket part fitting like it was meant to be there. And not only that, but it looks awesome. Now it's time for the next thing on the list, which is install the pilot bushing adapter and the pilot bushing. I completely forgot to order a pilot bushing, so that's already on order. But anyways, that goes in here, and then this will actually go on the crank. Now before getting this kit, I was forewarned that depending on which flywheel I get, it was going to need some machining work. In the instructions, it says to remove the timing ring as well as the starter ring. Luckily, all of that is just on bolts with this JWT flywheel. All right, so these actually use a 1/8 Allen. I tried to use a 3mm and almost stripped them. JWT trying to be different. And both of these rings, we'll just throw them away because we won't ever use them again. Probably not necessary to remove the starter ring, but it will reduce the rotating mass, which will help the engine rev faster and idle down faster. But it does come at the cost of making the clutch a little bit more difficult to control. I personally love a lightweight setup, especially on a street/track car, which is kind of what I'm going with this. Really hoping I wasn't gonna strip these. I absolutely hate Allens. And this is exactly why. No. Looks like we're breaking out the welder for the second time. Swear to God, if I had to pull the welder out one more time for this job, I'm gonna go crazy. Got some actual nuts welded on there. I think I use my welder more for things like this than actual projects. There's no way I didn't. There's our starter ring, and oh my God, we got some Phillips here. Luckily there's only 3 of them. Oh, damn it. Fuck. Oh my God. Damn. Why did I use the stupidest fucking hardware? And just when I thought I was done welding. Well, I feel kind of retarded because there's actually nuts on the back side of that, but whatever. We'll go ahead and loosen it from this side. There we go. There we go, just one bolt. With all 3 bolts out, we just had to go around the perimeter and tap the starter ring until it comes loose. There we go. Just 3 bolts to hold that. Now on the back side of the flywheel, there was 1 dowel pin. It needed to be removed and I was having some trouble gripping onto it, so I figured while I had the welder out, why not just make 1 more weld? There we go, big dowel. This flywheel with everything that we just removed on it was 14 pounds, 1.6 ounces. So let's see how much we removed. What? 10 pounds, 10 ounces. Look. Wow. So yeah, accounting for all the bolts, that is probably pretty damn accurate. That is very light, and also that was weight that we removed from the outside. That's a lot of rotating mass that we're gonna be saving in our drivetrain. That is really gonna help our engine speed up and slow down quicker. I've already said it, but I love a lightweight drivetrain, and this being on the engine is gonna free up a lot of horsepower. I honestly didn't expect this to weigh that much. It doesn't feel that heavy, but I guess with all the bolts and everything, it's close to 3.5 pounds. And here is the weight with everything. I have the original flex plate, flywheel, the clutch, and the pressure plate. That's all for the VQ. There's the weight of that. And here's the original setup that was on the VK with the automatic transmission. This is essentially everything that's going to be bolted to the engine, and there's the weight of that. So it's about a 12-pound difference. That's going to help this VK rev a lot faster than you hear with the trucks and the SUVs. This thing's going to rev like a sports car and no longer like a truck engine. Now here is the issue with this flywheel. So we're obviously going to have to machine it, but we're going to have to see where we're going to machine it. I'm going to put this upside down just for now. We're going to install the adapter plate right here. They call this the trigger plate. I like to call it the timing ring, whatever the hell you want to call it. That faces outside of the engine, so like this. It's basically what the crankshaft position sensor reads off of. So as you can see, it's resting on it, and it should not be resting on it, or at least you don't want it to be resting on it. So you see we got a little bit of a gap there. So the part that's touching is actually this lip right here. I think the only reason why it's beefed up in this section is for the starter ring. I honestly don't even think it's necessary. They probably could shave this down quite a bit. I might just have them go about halfway right here. So I reached out to a couple machine companies. The first company did the machine work on the back of the flywheel. They threw it on one of their lathes and I had them take off 5/16 of an inch. That cost me $100. And then the second company, which is an automotive machine shop, threw the flywheel on their balancer, and the first machine shop did such a great job, there was nothing to balance. So they charged me $45 just to check it, and I was on my way back home to get this thing all bolted up. My goal in this series was to do everything myself, but there's some things I just couldn't do. I finally got the backside of this flywheel ground down. I was in talks with the owner Colton at C3 Performance. Great guy for helping me out, and he really stands behind his products. He pulled up my exact flywheel in a CAD program and found that I need a 1/4 inch plus of clearance to clear the flex plate. And for clearance, I went ahead and just stepped it up just a little bit to 5/16 of an inch. I finally found a machine shop that was willing to do it in Lowell, Missouri called Trio. I brought this flywheel to them late in the day and I actually picked it up the next morning. It was recommended that I get it balanced, so I took it to another machine shop that has a flywheel balancer. I had them balance this thing at 7,500 RPMs, and it turns out they actually didn't need to do anything to it. And before we continue with the swap, I'm kind of curious again how much this thing weighs, because they did take quite a bit of material off. But let's go ahead and wing this thing. I think it was around 10 pounds. 10.48, that's the official weight of my flywheel. And just to double check, I'm gonna put the spacer on the flex plate, I'm gonna put the flywheel on top and make sure it doesn't make contact. Plenty of room down there. Actually probably could have been fine with a 1/4 of an inch, but it's weight savings. Now we're gonna be messing with these two parts. So this is what they call the flywheel spacer. This is what's gonna space out your flywheel. We just seen this part. This one right here is the pilot bushing adapter. So this is the part we're gonna see when we put the clutch and everything on. And this is the part that's gonna be pressed into the crankshaft. This stuff I ordered off of eBay. It's a pilot bushing and clutch alignment tool. It was like $20 and I needed both things, so I thought that was a pretty good deal. Pilot bushing I stuck in the freezer, so it's ice cold right now. I just did that so that it could slide in here easier. So once the pilot bushing flush with this part right here, so we'll go from this side. It's going in slowly. I'm glad I put this in the freezer. Let's see right there. That should be good enough. Now we need to take some of this red thread locker. They call it the minor outer diameter right here. The part that's actually going to sit in the crankshaft. We'll just lightly coat it here. Now because there's no bolts or anything that sandwiches this part in, this is a fairly important step and I would not skip it. Now we're going to insert this thing in the crankshaft. Kind of like a press fit, so tap it slightly. Just give it some taps with the mallet until it bottoms out, and that should be good. Next, we'll install the original flex plate and get it in position. Cool. Now our spacer. I don't think there's a front and a back. I think it's all the same. Just make sure you clean it up really good. Then we'll just chuck her on there and make sure it's aligned up with the dowel. And now our freshly machined flywheel. It also has a little dowel pin, but the dowel's obviously not gonna go through it. But just line it up anyways. Bam. That looks freaking sick. And now we got some bolts. So it says on the C3 instructions to refer to the instructions on your flywheel on what to torque these to. Torque specs for the JWT flywheel, and it says torque it to 70 foot-pounds, then loosen everything, put Loctite on the bolts, and then retighten it to 75 foot-pounds. So I looked up how to torque an 8-bolt wheel, and there's actually 2 different ways to do it. So I chose to do it this way. So top to bottom, left to right, and then diagonal. Okay. After that, I loosened each bolt one at a time, add some thread locker, and torque it back down to 75 foot-pounds. The tricky part was trying to keep the crank from spinning while I was tightening and loosening the bolts. A long breaker bar on the crank bolt braced against the ground seemed to be the answer. Now with that all on, it's time for the clutch and the pressure plate. Get the flywheel all clean one last time. It's always a good idea to do this before you put the clutch on, just in case there's any oils that could contaminate it. Then we'll thread the plastic clutch alignment tool through the clutch and install it on the flywheel. What this tool does is it pretty much helps us align the clutch, that way it's not up and down slightly, because when we tighten our pressure plate down, it's going to clamp this thing wherever it sits. Next, we'll throw the pressure plate on. These bolts will get torqued down to 32 foot-pounds. And every single one of these, I'm adding some Loctite to it. Bam, baby. All right, so everything's torqued up on that, and we're on the final stretch here. This adapter is for the CD transmissions, and it's also for the JK transmissions. So these are where the bolts are gonna go on the top. So not all the holes in the adapter plate are gonna have bolts in them. Well, we're on the final stretch here. 6 more bolts, and the G35's original 6-speed manual transmission will become one with its new engine. An engine that was never designed for anything but an automatic, but this one is getting something different. I'm gonna start threading some bolts in so we can get this thing lined up. Wow. This thing is finally coming together. Other than some unexpected machining work, the C3 adapter, lifesaver. If you're gonna do this swap, this is 100% the way to go. This 5.6 liter, naturally aspirated, at least for now, V8 meets its new friend. No, not you, Moose. I'm talking about the transmission. The drivetrain is finally complete, but is the G35 ready for it? In the next episode, we'll address that.